another episode of Poise et Joie here on YouTube. I hope you have found many episodes on this channel and gone back to before I figured out a name for it. But on this channel, there are many videos going all the way back to 2011. Some of it's my work, a lot of it is other people's work. I'm trying to make a collection of poems from all over the world, sort of like an introduction to world poetry. That's grand, and I don't think it's possible, but I'm trying to do it. So if you find a poem on here that you like and you are able to read it in its original language, do so. But I tend to read the English translations because it's the language I'm most familiar with, and also it's the language of the internet. But if you know the original language, do go back and read it in that because poetry in translation is like its own art form. There's poetry and then there's poetry in translation. So I encourage people to do that. But yes, feel free to go back through the channel and enjoy all the videos, right? This is just your jumping off point. I try to post here at least once a month, more or less. Sometimes I forget. I try to post like around the 20th of every month, but sometimes I forget and don't post until the 25th. I'm sorry. Don't shame me. I have a really bad memory because of some of the medication I'm on because I'm disabled and I was born disabled, but I have acquired other things along the way that at this point the medication I'm on to take care of various things is now affecting my memory. But I do my best, okay? So there is usually an episode once a month, sometime around the 20th. If it's a little bit late, I do try to get it up before the end of the month, okay? Now, um, this month, and I do my best not to double read poems, but at this point there are so many poems on this channel that it is possible that I might lose track of what poems I have read and what poems I haven't. But I do my best not to read a poem twice. But just in case I do, because like I said, my medication is messing with my memory a little bit. And we've been trying to work that out with the doctor, but the medication they tried to put me on to prevent um, the memory loss, turns out I was allergic to it, so we had to go back to the original one. Oh well. Anyway, this time we're going to read a poem by Lorenzo Thomas in his collection Dancing on Main Street. This is a collection I got some years ago. I just pulled this off my shelf just now. We're going to read the final poem in the collection. Yep. The collection I think came out in 2004. I got it sometime after that because I'm pretty sure I read it in this apartment and I was not even in this town in 2004. This is my hometown, but I was living in a different one in 2004. Anyway, because we moved out of this town when I was 5, so I came back to my hometown through quite a journey. Anyway, and I was living in this apartment, the apartment rouge that I'm filming in right now, when I first bought this book. So I've had it sometime in the last 10 years is when I bought it, but I can't tell you when now. Anyway, we're going to read the final poem in the collection. It's called Backorder Tears, and I think it's real interesting because it's very 1980s coded, but it's almost like it's written after the 1980s. Almost like the 1980s didn't want to die. That's not the right way to put it either. The 1980s. Well, you'll see when I read it. It's like imagine yourself in the 1990s and you meet somebody who still dresses like the 1970s and still behaves like they're living in the culture of the 1970s. It still does all, takes the psychedelic DRU. Well, this channel isn't monetized, so I can just say it. Still takes the psychedelic drugs and still does the disco scene and that whole thing. But they're living in the 1990s. That's how this poem reads. And it just struck me as really strange. You know, that kind of off off-corded anachronistic moment that you would have. Well, okay, so backordered tears. It was when neon was no longer available that they went mad. There was nothing to cut the formica. Offbeat, shouting dirty words, dropping glitter on backward lands. Nothing seemed to help. It was 1:45 in a small, dull town. Jukebox exhausted, coffee burned stale. A go-go girl sloughs on her bedroom slippers, punches some feeling back into her thighs. It was in those days musicians started dancing. Didn't have to touch their instruments. In fact, they couldn't even stop the music playing. It was so much sadness in the world. So it's like looking back on the 80s or the 80s, yeah, like an anachronistic moment looking back on the 80s and going, what? What was that moment in time? What? Because people nowadays, I guess it's mostly for the benefit of Gen X. I don't know, which I am Gen X, but people tend to be nostalgic about the 80s now, and you see like these people, these young people on TikTok or where. I don't have TikTok, but you see the shorts everywhere, right? But they're on YouTube, they're on Facebook, where people want to do the hair, which really doesn't work because hairspray these days is not the same kind of hairspray because they banned the hairspray that was available in the 80s because it was literally destroying the environment, destroying the atmosphere. And so the hairspray that is available today does not have the same kind of hold. So you can't do those kind of hairstyles. But they tried. And you can tell they're trying and failing, right? Anyway, but they try, and they try to do the makeup, and they try to do the clothes, and it kind of looks like it, and very much doesn't at the same time. And they're like, born in 2000 whatever, should have been born in the 80s, you know, kind of reels kind of thing. And you see this where people are romanticizing the 80s, but those of us who lived through it, this poem, this poem, because we look back on it and we remember it, and we kind of go, yeah, it wasn't all that, you know, it was not all that. It was like, I mean, there were things about it that were good. There were things about it that were so much better than now. But it was not utopia, honey. And it was not nice. There were things about it that were just as bad as today is. Um, and this poem is kind of like that because it's like that discordant note. Looking back on the 80s and seeing the discordant note, right? Not romanticizing it, looking back on it and seeing it realistically. That's what I appreciated this for. I mean, because it's okay to look back and see the good things about things, but we don't want to over romanticize things either. It's like, well, yeah, there were good things about it. Childhood is always nice. Some aspects of childhood are always nice because certain parts of your brain are not fully developed, and so you're not capable of understanding the nuanced parts of life, and so there are aspects of life that will totally go over your head because you are not capable of processing them in your childhood. You are blissfully ignorant in the best way because you just don't have those parts of your brain developed to process that. And that's what makes childhood so wonderful. But that that doesn't mean that that decade was all that beautiful, blissful ignorance-ness that you remember. Because personally, that's not how I remember it, even though I was the blissfully ignorant child going through it. I guess even though my brain wasn't fully developed to be able to process it, I remembered enough of it that when I got old enough to process it, I could go, ew. And so it's a healthy thing to be able to look back and go, I like the parts of my childhood that were nice. I like the parts of the 80s and 90s that were nice. But I acknowledge the parts of it that were not. I acknowledge the reality of what was, good and bad. And this poem is one. Excuse me. This poem is one of those because it's like it looks back on it and goes, it strikes that discordant note, right? Even the title, "Back Ordered Tears," is like looking back on it and going, oh, maybe it wasn't all that, because the tears are back ordered. Anyway, that's my personal feelings on it, but you may have gotten something else from it. That's the beautifulness of poetry, though. Each I mean, a poet can write it and be thinking one thing, but each reader that comes to it with something else, and so it's the combination of the poet and each individual reader that comes to that poem, and whatever thing they make out of it. In my mind, that's it's a collaborative process between the poet and the reader, and so the poem has perpetual um, transforming abilities on that way in that way as far as whatever you want it to mean for you. Because sometimes I look back on some of my earliest work and I know what I meant when I was writing it. Sometimes I can't remember, and um, but I'll still think, wow, there's no way I wrote that. I wrote that. It says I wrote it. I remember writing it, but now it's like, how did that come out of me? And I'm sure that every person who reads it has their own um, way that they enter the poem, as the saying goes. Their own entering point, the way they enter the poem, which means their own way of interpreting it, um, their own way of relating to it, right? So the poem has infinite ways of transforming for every person who comes to it. And I'm sure that the meaning of it changes for me too as I grow and with it, even after I've written it, because like I said, I go back to my early work and I'm just like, wow, that came out of me. And sometimes I do go back and read it and I'm like, when I was writing it, I had no intention of it coming across that way. But now that I'm older and I'm reading it, there are some like metaphors in here that I had no intention of them coming across that way, but they kind of do. And I just didn't notice it at the time. It's just, oops. It's but that's the nature of poetry. It does that, and that's one of the things that makes it such an amazing art form because it's so condensed. And what you don't say is even more important than what you do. There's all these open spaces for interpretation, both for you and the person who comes to it. So it's like this ever perennial thing, right? Anyway, I hope you come back for more poetry next month. I have no idea what I'll be reading, but we will find out together. Share the joy. If you liked what you found on this channel, or whatever you find in your daily readings, feel free to share the joy. Poetry always needs shared, right? Share the poésie. Have a fabulous day. Thank you for joining me here today, and Dona Dago Ha'i.